Well, thank you everybody for coming tonight for one of our Wye Valley Wilding online talks. We've got one more online talk after this in March, and then we are back to in-person meetings. The weather should be good enough, so I'm really looking forward to that, getting out onto some sites again and seeing everyone in person. But tonight's talk, as you all know, managing grassland for invertebrates. We've got Tim Kaye here, who is expert ecologist and runs the local it's a local charity, CIC, Plant All About Learning. Yeah, social enterprise. Thank you, Tim. And he's going to tell us a little bit about Plant and about managing our grasslands for invertebrates. So I'm really looking forward to this because I think I'm going to learn a lot from tonight. So over to you, Tim. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me, really. It's just a great opportunity for me to ramble on. Hopefully I won't bore too many people, because I know there's a few quite interested people here. So what we're going to do is going to run through a subject that's quite sort of not dear to my heart, but I've had quite a lot of experience of the last sort of few years, really. This first slide here is actually a grassland which I help to manage. It's a traditional hay meadow in Peterchurch, and it's seen sort of rapid improvement in the botanical interest, and that primarily is what people mainly look for. They look at the botanical interest of grasslands, and they go around and throw quadrats around and map them and all that. And it's often overlooked. The grassland aspect is really overlooked in terms of its entomological interest. So people don't really record. If they do, they might look at doing a bee transect walk, which bumblebee, as some people might be familiar with, doing bumblebee transects and having that as a bit of a gauge, because it is an easy way in, as I'll explain later on. So I'm going to split it down into a few sections, and there I am in action with young people there, we're swishing nets around. So we're just going to say, okay, briefly, what are grasslands, what grassland types are there? And some people will fall asleep at that bit because they think, please don't patronise me. But we'll just go through that. And then go through the different invertebrate types or groups, major groups, and we'll pick out a few examples. Now, what we're going to try and do is do some of the invertebrates you're likely to see. I'm trying to pick ones that are quite fairly common and give those as good examples and good talking points, really. And then a little bit about how you manage for invertebrates, how you encourage invertebrates to your grasslands. And lastly, I'm just going to do a couple of case studies, which won't be very long. So, we should be finished by about 12 o'clock. So, don't worry, folks. All right. I've cut it down a little bit. So, first of all, different types of grassland. We'll start with this one, the Calcicolous Grasslands you can get. So this is primarily where it's quite alkaline, and that's because of the underlying rock type. In this case, it's chalk, also limestone, and you get different types of grassland on this substrate. So you actually just pick out their quaking grass, which you don't tend to get if the actual rock type isn't calcicolous. Tall fescue, that sort of thing. And you can see this lovely bit of grassland there in Wiltshire with fragrant orchids in. And so in Herefordshire, I'm speaking mostly from Herefordshire point of view because I don't know the surrounding counties. You haven't got a lot of limestone. You've got a little bit in the Dowers, which everyone will know is quite a special place in Herefordshire. And you've got little patches here and there. You've got a little patch in Hoffwood. But generally there's not a lot of this habitat, and so people maybe not familiar with it so much. And then you've got the Calcifugous Grasslands, which are acidic in nature, so might be dominated by purple moorgrass, possibly deer grass, and the sheep's fescue, that sort of thing. You get a lot of this up in the uplands areas. They're quite acidic. In Herefordshire again, you're going to get these acidic grasslands on the Darrans, next to the Black Mountains, but also in the Hergus Croft and the edge of the Malverns. So it's quite nice acid grassland, short acid grassland around. But probably the grassland most people are familiar with are the mesotrophic grasslands, where the pH is about in the middle. It's not acidic, not alkaline. So you can see there, this is a nice, I think this is from Helen's Manor, this one. And you can see there, people are probably familiar with yellow rattle. I think meadow foxtail at the foreground as well. So you really want a mixture of grass and grass types in there. And, your composition must, you've got to have a variety of different grasses and not just one. Obviously, when you talk about grasslands, you can talk about amenity grasslands with just perennial ryegrass, which, still have some interest, but not that great a deal. So these are probably what most people are, perhaps managing themselves, and they can probably be very familiar with. So just to point out, there are other areas where you get grasslands. So you get on the sand dune communities. If you go to the coast, you get these fixed dune grasslands. Of course, mobile dunes are composed of marron grass, I suppose, but they wouldn't necessarily call them grasslands. And then you've also got maritime cliff communities, which again have a grass component in them. In this case, even bluebells, which yes do exist outside of a woodland as well. They don't mind being out, with a lot of sunlight, surprisingly. So when you talk about grass, and they could be anywhere, but the most common ones are, we think, your traditional hay meadows and that sort of thing. So just to point out, this whole talk really is about stressing the importance of grassland for invertebrates. Trevor Dines did a recent book I read, and he's a foremost botanist, as some people will know. And he just did some unpublished data. He took the 67 most common meadow species of lowland neutral grassland. Please don't ask me what they are offhand. I haven't memorised them. But he just took that as this is more of a thought experiment, really. And he worked out they have the potential to support over 1,400 insect species. And obviously there are other meadow species there you could choose as well. So within that, just to break it down a bit, just to stress this, you could potentially support 297 macromoths, okay, 193 micromoths, which people know they're all the same thing, really, moths, aren't they? But 103 species of aphids, 102 gall midges, there's a little gall midge, 91 weevils, 87 leaf mining flies, 57 leaf beetle species, 29 sawflies, and 23 species of thrips. Just to point out, they are always thrips, even if they're singular. They are thrips. It's a bit like Greg's. You don't go for a Greg, do you? You go for a Greg's, and this is the same thing for thrips. So 23 species of thrips, which are often plant specific. So we go. That gives you a bit of an idea. Now, in all this, we've got to think about invertebrate life cycles. Now, in this case, we could say, oh, hang on, I've got this. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Just to point, I put this slide in before, just to show you the whole gamut of what we mean by an invertebrate, something without a backbone. And obviously, we're not going to be looking at the Gordian worms today. You'll be saddened to know. But we're just going to look at these things in the red. Okay, mainly insects, but also, some of the arachnids as well. I won't talk too much about things like snails and slugs and crustaceans because it's not their optimal habitat. You had to make a cut somewhere. But anyway. Now, yes, as I was saying, metamorphosis is very important in the life cycle of invertebrates. So on the top line, you have the complete metamorphosis, the classic hungry caterpillar of an egg going into the larva, then the pupa, then the adults. So if you take just insects as one of the groups of invertebrate, in 90% of the cases, it's a complete metamorphosis. The other 10% have an incomplete metamorphosis, so just eggs, and then going through a series of nymphal stages until you get to the adult later on in the year. And they molt and get bigger, basically. And of course, that occurs in spiders as well, so other things that aren't insects. That's important to consider when we're looking at grasslands, because if, as we say, traditional hay meadows, they get cut. Where do they live? How do they go through all their molts? So that's important to point out, because we need to think about, what do the larvae feed on as well as the adults? And that's what often people neglect. They just think about, there's all this thing about, pollinators and, have growing nice things to adults to feed on nectar, and not even considering what the larvae feed on. Because they're not as attractive, are they? They're ugly things. So yeah, that's we'll see this becomes clear as we go through the talk, really. So I'll start with springtails, because they are incredibly important. They are beautiful things. If anyone out there doesn't know what a springtail is, you will know them if you've ever done any sort of gardening or things like that, and you'll be scuffling around in the leaf litter. These tiny little things flit up into the air, and they are the springtails. There's about 3 or 4 major groups of them. These are it's a lovely picture of. This isn't my picture, by the way. Some of these pictures are mine, some of them aren't. This one, as it's good, isn't mine. It's a guy called Andy Murray, not that one, not the tennis player, who takes lots of lovely pictures. And some people will know they're absolutely amazing. So these are globular springtails. Springtails are, in the Latin, was it Greek? I think it means it's Collembola, which means glue peg. We'll get onto that. It's basically a little structure underneath their body that sort of it's the function of which is sort of unclear. They might derive some benefit from water retention and being close to their substrate. Also, they might use it as a little sort of like a little seat or something like that. They all have that. A lot of springtails have also, I was going to say, they also incur up to 100,000 individuals in a cubic metre of soil, which is pretty astounding. They're really important in terms of their, recycling potential. They chew away at tiny bits of debris in the soil and feed on rotting remains. It's incredibly important for the health of the soil. I was going to say, what they also have is a furcula, that helps them propel themselves up and out of danger. However, not all of them have this, so why they don't have them, I don't know. Perhaps some of the smaller ones don't seem to need them. I always go outside and put my shoes on, and there's a massive one, Phyocoris longicornis, I think it's called. And that always jumps around crazily. It's actually 6 millimeters, so it's quite a large one. But yeah, as I say, they are really, really important in terms of the fact that you get 100,000 in a good humic soil. You get 100,000 individuals. So when you think about your meadow, you've got to think about in the round and think what's the soil, what's composing that soil, and springtails are a major part of that. As are mites, but I won't get into them. But I will mention another one of the arachnids, the spiders. Now, if you've ever swept in a meadow, or even looked out on a sort of dewy morning, you can see the myriad of spiders that are present. Some research was done, I think it's Switzerland or Germany, I can't remember which this is from right now, but they worked out for these meadows in Switzerland or Germany, I can't remember, that there are around 250 individuals per metre, which, is just mind-blowing, isn't it? And if anyone's actually swept out a sweep of a meadow, probably concur that's it probably is about right. There's these tiny little money spiders that are in multitudes. There's so many of them, and they're all feeding on all the other invertebrates in there. So let's just go through a few of the common ones. Here's where we get to the meat of the thing. The candy striped spider. There's actually 4 species, 2 of which are common. You're not supposed to, do them by sight really. These things. You're supposed to look at their pedipalps. So that's a male on the right. You can just about see these inflated little pedipalps. It looks like little boxing gloves. And they're what transfer the sperm into the female. On the left, it's a female. This is probably Enoplognathra ovata. Let's say the other varieties are available, but these things are incredibly common in grassland. You'll always find them. I mean, the amount of times I've said yes, it's probably a candy stripe spider, and they're called candy stripe because they have this sort of nice, sometimes not always, but nice yellow and red sort of arrangement in the abdomen. You can see that it's got 2 body part spiders. So that's a really common one you'll find, and if you join us on the 6th of June, you'll probably find them. Now, this is one that I've been seeing recently. Herefordshire is really poor for recording of spiders, I've realised. If there are anybody out there in Herefordshire that's recording spiders, please let me know, because I don't see any sort of spider records come in too much. They're quite technical because, as I say, a lot of them can only be done by looking at the epigene or the pedipalps, really. But this one you can do. I don't know if people can make out a sort of cricket bat type shape there on its abdomen, and that's called the cricket bat spider. So this is probably how unknown these things are. I hadn't seen a record of this thing in the county. Saw it at Ashburton School in 2022, I think it was, and then just kept on seeing them all over the place. I just kept on finding them different locations. They're probably really common. Like a lot of these things, they're probably common if you're looking for them. We just don't know. So half of these invertebrates, but it's a lovely little thing, and it's just one I mentioned because you can do it without having to resort to the microscope. One thing you can do as well. One of the species you can do without a microscope as well is a nursery web spider. It has kind of a distinctive abdomen and markings on its cephalothorax. There's one that actually has some parental care. Loves grasslands. You can see there it's got this triplate sort of web meshing all the grass together, and they do half look. I only say they only half look after spiders. They're not, they're terrible. They're terrible mothers, really. But this is probably one of the better ones. Most spiders just lay their eggs and that's it. Job done. But it's one you'll find quite common, and because they're large, like all these things, if they're large, they like to be seen and recorded. If they're not, if they're going to be less than 5 millimeters, got less a chance of being recorded, really. This one people might be familiar with, the flower crab spider. It's one of the crab spider. You can see why it's called a crab spider, because it has this form. It sort of scuttles sideways as well if you get it in the flesh, and they actually take on the colour of different. They sort of mimic the colour of the flowers. The rest are on the rest at the top of the flower head there. As soon as a bee comes along or whatever, it'll wallop. He'll have it. I did have a photo of that. I couldn't find it, which is really annoying. And they're big as well. So I'm sure people have seen them here. They're a lovely little thing. You get other types of crab spider as well. Again, a lot of them are quite tricky to ID, but if you get them in a net, you'll sort of know roughly they'll be in a group at least. You can say with a crab spider. They're nice to see. Now, the wolf spider group, there's loads of them. And this one, as well as having an egg sac, it actually has the young on its back, which is, I think, only occurs. I think it's Parvidosa armentata, but I can't remember. I did have a look at it, but there we go. It doesn't matter what it is. These are wolf spiders. They don't tend to lay much silk around. They just hunt by being active and fast. So as soon as you get a little ray of sunshine, I know I We haven't seen much recently of that at all. As soon as you get it, you'll see these things scuttling around all over the place. And they're wolf spiders. Again, very difficult to ID down to species level. Harvestmen are very important as well. Say they're not spiders; they are in their own group. They've just got one body part. They've got various different morphological things that make them distinct. They used to have little, the eyes on the turrets and that sort of thing. Not always long legs. They often see them as they have longer legs than spiders. They're actually, I didn't realise they actually do require quite a lot of humidity to survive. They don't like being dried out, although I've always seen them in quite dry places. But they must vary according. There's only about 25 species of them in the UK, although we're finding a few more, year by year. Excuse me. So you will see them if you, especially on bushes as well. You can beat them off hedgerows. And this is one of the common ones, really. I've started looking at them. I find them very tricky. There is a nice app you can use online to ID them. Now, we come to another group, which a couple of people watching this will learn a lot more than me about the Hemiptera, the true bugs. This is quite a common species. It's a predatory bug. Dicyphus errans. Again, I'm sure hardly anyone records Dicyphus errans. There'll be a lot of records of robbing coming in, not for this thing. So really common predatory bug. It just shows you in this picture why it's a true bug. I mean, a lot of things are called bugs, mini beasts, whatever. And it's called the rostrum, which is this mouth part, which is like a big straw, a big syringe. Is that the functions of it? The actual morphological structure of it is quite complex, really. It's in two parts, but we won't go into that. Tucks underneath its body. You can't see it. Sometimes they get mistaken for beetles, depending on what type of bug they are. But if you look underneath, you'll see this rostrum. Their wings are, as you can see, they're transparent with slightly sclerotized parts on the wings, and they form a sort of cross rather than a sort of with a big rather than a line. So that's one of them. And if you were ever doing any sort of sweeping again, you will see the abundance of bugs is just astounding. People are amazed when you take them out and show them how much biomass is out there of spiders, of springtails, of bugs, if you have a good functioning grassland. So you'll see this thing, the meadow plant bug, the Leptopterna, dolabrata. There is another common one, as people will know. You have to measure the length of the antennae. But again, this is one of the ones, and there are lots of them, that you just get in there, thousands. There's so many of them out there. Unless you have the right equipment, you just don't see them. Don't notice them that much. But some of them are very colourful and very nice to see. As this thing, so if you're going to get into bugs at all, I do recommend you get into Shieldbugs because they're a nice entry sort of level drug. So they're nice and big, they're colourful, and easily found, really. So this is one that it likes grassland, likes dry grasslands. I think it's been pushing up northwards with changing climate. And you get it everywhere. I've been finding some of these Shieldbugs now. You didn't get them 10 years ago. You now get them up in Herefordshire because of the climate, changing climate. And this is a really common one. It's called a bishop mitre. There we go. Just to give you a bit of an idea of the many forms that the true bugs have. It's one of the leafhoppers. It's just a common one you'll find. Some of them are very tricky to ID. This one isn't so bad because it's just lurid kind of green colour, and they do hop rather readily. And the reason this species is quite large, really, so it's not too bad. I'm sure some people here will have recognised this one. There are a lot of other very small little things that are again, sometimes can be very numerous. Should point out, of course, that all these bugs, well, not all of them, some of them are predatory, but a lot of them use that rostrum to pierce the tissue of plants and suck out the juices. So, some of them can be agricultural pests, but this one I just picked out simply because I looked around on various maps and whatnot, and records, and there's hardly any records of it until I turned one up in Hereford City, I mean. And then after that, got my eye in, saw a couple of other locations. Again, it's just that sort of thing. You get your eye in, you get your search image, and these things, we will find them. Long-legged plant bug. It's got quite nice marked legs there as well. It's not a great picture. It's the best I could do, really. Again, it's just one that just shows you that if you're out there looking at these things, you will find them. They're not a particularly, there's not enough people looking at them, really. Now, I just thought I'd mention the Diptera as well. I'm mentioning all this sort of things you'll like, the groups that are likely to find. Not going to mention perhaps the millipedes and centipedes and woodlice, that sort of thing. They will, of course, be found in grassland, but Diptera are more common. So this is one of the ones. It looks like a hogfly, actually, and I've done it numerous times. Gone, oh, look at that hogfly. Oh no, it's not. Hogflies have a false vein running through the wing, and they have a false margin, and there's various other little bits and pieces that they have. But Diptera have just the two wings. And this is one of the common sort of flies you'll see flying around on a sunny day. The broad centurion, very, very lovely iridescence in green. It's a lovely thing. This is another thing you'll see. The one of the crane flies. It's very, very common when it comes out. I think it's June or something like that. May, June, I think. You can see what's called the spotted crane flies. Has these nice markings down the back of the abdomen there. And their young will, of course, be in the soil. So badgers like to turn them up and try and root them out. Again, so maybe in agricultural situations they're not appreciated because they just, they're in the soil and they're a bit of a pest. But there are other lovely crane flies. I just bought the book on them. There's a nice book you can buy on them. I haven't actually used it much yet, but this is probably one of the common ones you'll see, and you'll notice, and you think, "Oh, crikey, that's a nice beast for a crane fly." Now, I know some people will be, especially me, will be going, "Oh God, a horsefly." They are stunning insects to look at. I mean, look at that eye, and actually the wings are. You can't see it there properly, but the wings are lovely as well. I mean, quite a stunning little beast. And this is one that I think it's young. They pupate in the soil. So, having a soil that isn't ploughed or disturbed in any way is a benefit to it. And I think it's the males don't feed. I think it's the females that feed on blood of horses and humans. My arms swell up like crazy. So, sorry, common horsefly, you are the only thing I do actually actively kill, and I don't feel too bad about it. I tend not to kill too many things, but common horsefly is probably the only one. I don't know why he's doing a Nazi salute there. That's not very good, is it? But there we are. Now, we also got this little thing, which I've just got my eye on recently with it. It's called the Fruginous bee grabber. So they actually, you can see they have a funny thing. They curl their abdomens underneath their body and have a funny way of sitting. Once you see this thing, you'll remember it, and they're parasites of bees. So it shows interconnectedness of all what's going on in your meadow. If you've got bees, you've got all these other parasites going on, which is good. Don't ever be worried about having parasites. I say it just shows you've got a healthy population of that particular species. Having a parasite is actually good news. Now this thing I just popped in because I had a nice photo of it. Really, it just shows you the breadth of. I mean, flies. We could do a whole presentation on flies. Really, the downland villa. It's mainly a southern species, I believe, and it turned up in Herefordshire a few years ago now, especially on the Doward. It's very common there, and it's been seen in other locations. This is actually from a friend of mine's porch, but it was sort of sat there nice and still. They're supposed to, I think, the larvae feed on noctuid moth larvas. I think they believe that's the host species anyway, noctuid moths. But again, it's just all these things, of course, need nectar to feed on as well, of them, as well as something else. So the adults are flying around, feed on nectar, but of course, they need their young will feed on different things. Now, we can't mention grasslands without mentioning Orthoptera, the grasshoppers and crickets. So everyone will be fairly familiar. There's only a few species in the UK to look at, really, and this is one of the common ones. And it's probably one of my better photos as well, which is nice. The good thing about this group is that you can get fairly good at them reasonably quickly and distinguish between some of the main forms. That's the meadow grasshopper. Well, at least I hope it is. I haven't just labelled it wrong. But they have an incomplete metamorphosis. So they will go through nymphal stages and molts until they get to July, August, when they'll be a full adult. And that's the best time to see them and to hear them. And some of them have short wings, some of them have long wings, some have no wings. But they need longer, taller grass in which to thrive, really. So wherever you've got longer patches of grass, you'll find them. Primarily, obviously, they eat the grass, but they need to be hidden from predation. So if they don't have short vegetation, they're a nice treat to be predated by other things. Of course, in other countries, they're eaten by humans as well. But that's not a done thing here. Apologies for this photo here because everything is in focus apart from the actual insects, about the common groundhopper. This is one that you will see more hops. Doesn't do a big leap. It just hops very fairly slowly across the ground. They like bare ground. They're a moss feeder, I'm led to believe. So you need sort of patch the bare ground with moss, and you'll find this thing. I don't think it's recorded quite as much, but they're not that uncommon. But if you've got a patch of grassland that has sort of bit bearish ground with moss on, they need the heat with these things. All these Orthoptera, they're heat-loving insects. So not just them, but they're young. So you'll have it if it's a slightly warmer things. The one I put in as an example, which I'm sure you will be familiar with, or fairly familiar with, is Rizal's bush cricket. Now, up until about 1985, I think it was, they're found on the inland side of salt marshes. But now they just really have pushed up in their range and their habitats they can be found in. So a lot of grass and tall grass, and we'll have scrub and that sort of thing. We'll have Rizal's bush cricket. Rizal was a German entomologist. That's where it comes from. And they are defined by having this sort of Nike swoosh. That's not a particularly great example, really, but they have this swoosh on the side of the abdomen. That is a female there with the ovipositor. And you'll find them all over the place, really, now. Now, going into my area of moderate expertise, although it's not great in any aspect, really, but Coleoptera, the beetle. So beetle means to bite, I think, in the German, and they have mouth parts that will give you a bit of a nip, depending on how big they are. Now, I just thought I'd put this one in because it's something that will be very prevalent if you've ever got docks. You always get a green dock beetle. The green dock beetle is a beetle in the chrysomelid, the seed or leaf beetles, and they're distinguished by having these little pock-marked elytra, the wing cases, and they're often very brightly coloured. They're a lovely group to study because some of them are quite bright and colourful, and they're quite charismatic, really. Some of them are quite small though, but this one is, relatively common, so you'll see it all over the place. The female has a massively inflated abdomen where she's got the eggs inside of her, and you'll see them mating all over the docks and stripping them apart and causing them to turn into shreds of their former selves. This is another one that is you're bound to see on tall flowering plants, is the swollen thigh beetle. It's the male, I think it's only the male that has the swollen thigh. You can see it there quite distinctly. It's got a massively swollen thigh on it. Eudemera they're quite a lovely beetle again. There are Eudemera viridis, I think is another one, a very common one. But if you've got some sort of flowering plants, some sort of Asteraceae, the daisy family, you'll get it for that nectar there. There we are. This is something that will turn up. Now, weevils, they're a massive group, and as anyone's ever known, the weevil group, they are really quite tricky, which is why I haven't even put the species on this one. It's a protopion, I think. Some people might correct me on that, I'm sure, but this seed weevil, so they feed on seeds. Weevils do quite often have a particular host plant they like. Others will be more polyphagous, they'll feed on a range of different things, but some of them are, specific to that plant. And because they're so small, you won't notice them unless you're sort of tapping or beating or stuff like that. This time of year, you can still do a little bit of beetling. You can actually get to do some tusking, it's called. You can chop a sort of big wedge of a big grass and chop it up and shake it out into a white tray or something and see what you find. And there'll be beetles there even this time of year. Now, I just thought I'd mention this one as well. I have been getting into my carabid beetles, and this is a bit of an unusual one, really, because unlike most carabid beetles, which scuttle along the floor using their long legs to get around and to eat things, this one actually goes up stems of plants, and so you'll find that when you sweep vegetation, you get this, what is actually a carabid beetle. A lot of carabid beetles are black. This one has got a blacker head and then browner body. And it's called the hairy temple thatcher beetle. You can just about make out he's got little hairs on the base of his head there. I think there's about 4 species of this, but that's the commonest one. At least it's the common one that I find anyway, most of the time. But all these kind of things like that, you just wouldn't see unless you go out there with a net and have a good look. You just won't see them, really. I couldn't mention beetles without mentioning the ladybird family. Obviously, they're aphid feeders, a lot of them. Quite a few of them are on trees, but others will be found in vegetation as well. Depending where you are, I put the harlequin ladybird in, which has, of course, 100 forms. I've got about 100 colour forms. Everyone's probably fairly familiar with it. They have orangey legs, and they're a bit bigger than a lot of our native ladybird species. We don't quite know if they are damaging native ladybird species at this point, but it's been quite a while since they're in the country. Whether they are or not is up for question. I haven't got a picture of it here, but probably one of the commoner ones, not the 7-spot ladybird, is a thing called Rhizobia latura, which is very, very common in grassland. It's fairly tiny, but wherever I've swept, I find this tiny little ladybird, and there are a number of others that are, really tiny. They're about 1 millimeter. One's called the dot ladybird, which looks like a full stop. Again, if you're not got your net around with you, and a hand lens, you won't see it necessarily. Now, hand lens not really needed for this one. The longhorn beetles, again, if I would suggest a group to get into for people out there, shieldbugs are good, grasshoppers are fairly good, not that many of them, bright, colourful, blah, blah, blah. These things, longhorn beetles, nice family, nice and big, very sexy colours, and it's one of the things you'll find on flowering plants, daisies and thistles and that sort of thing. You always pretty much get it, which is really nice. I think that a lot of the larval forms will pupate and live in dead wood. I'm pretty sure. Well, I don't, not quite, can't quite remember on this one, but a lot of them do pupate in dead wood, which is important, as we'll get to it later on. And this one, like violet oil beetle, please let me know. I mean, a friend of mine sent me actually a picture of a oil beetle recently. It was a little car park, which is amazing. And other places I've seen them, they're quite incredible. So from this time onwards, really, you'll see the adults crawling around. They have quite an amazing life cycle. So they will dig a little tunnel in the soil and lay quite a few eggs. Those eggs will hatch out, and these tiny little larvae called triangulins will crawl up the stems of plants. Oh, I think I've got a picture of the little triangulins, and they'll then try to hitch a lift on a bee. They're parasites on bees. Once they get to the bees' nests, they'll eat eat their eggs, eat the larvae. The bees won't harm them in any way. I don't think they're solitary bees. They obviously exude some sort of chemical to deter being eaten, I guess, as a lot of these things do. And then they'll pupate eventually and come out as the adult. Weirdly enough, I've actually read that the triangulins do change form as well. The actual larva, these triangulins will change form 3 times, I think it is, which is unheard of. Now you might also think, well, how on earth is that big lumbering thing there? They're mating them. Not going to be picked off by predators. I mean, they're pretty noticeable. They're massive things. They actually can say a lot of them contain cantharidins, which are sort of these poisonous chemicals, which will just make things that'd be horrible to eat. So they're not going to be worried they exude these chemicals to deter off their potential predators. There's 4 or 5 species in the UK. Yes, the commonest one. You also get the rugged oil beetle in Herefordshire. The 2 or 3 others are more southerly things. You'll get, in Dorset and places like that. So if anyone has any records or anything, actually, just please let me know. It'd be very exciting to find more of these things. So you have to have, solitary bee species. I think it's more the andrinas and that sort of thing. They're parasites on. You have to have these good populations of bees to have this thing. So it's a good sign. Now, let's go on to the Leptoptera. I'm conscious that we're getting on for time, so I won't spend too long on the Leptoptera. Some people are familiar with butterflies. Marble whites are grass feeders, and there was some research gone into what is particularly associated with grasslands, and really only the meadow brown came out as having specifically the grasslands. A lot of butterflies seem to like a more mixture of habitat, really, with grasses in it, but obviously with hedgerow to shelter them, and different topography, different bare places to sun themselves and that sort of thing. But anyway, you'll be filling with the meadow browns, get them in the hundreds, in July, along with the what's the other one? Not speckled wood. You know what I'm talking about. The ringlet, that's what I was talking about. Ringlet, of course. I haven't got a picture of the ringlet anyway. Common blue, I thought I'd put a little picture of that. Now, you'll only get this video on Melilot there, I think, but its actually food plant is the bird's foot trefoil, I think, from memory. So it's the thing that if you haven't got bird's foot trefoil, you're not going to get the common blue. Having this variety of plants in your grassland is essential for all these different things. It's good. Hark back to the on the first slides when I talked about, if you have those 67 species of common meadow plants, you're going to get potentially 1,400 species of insects. There we are, common blue, small copper. I think that's a sorrel feeder, and of course it's feeding. Oh, the adult, of course, is feeding on nectar there. One of my favourite butterflies. It's rather lovely. The sorrel feeder. There's another sorrel feeder in the Forester, which people might be familiar with, and it's got it's got this amazing look to it of this iridescent green. There are another few species of forester moths. I think New Forest, I think. But this one is quite nice. It's posing quite nicely on an orchid for me, which is really nice of it. Talking about grasslands, here's a few other species that are grass feeders. Antler moth, I think it likes a variety of different grass species. Do feed on ragwort there. Dusky sallow, again a grass feeder. Adult feeding on thistle or knapweed. And then we've got these things which people will be familiar with. Ever walked through a grassland, you'll see a grass moth. This is just one of the many types. And there's quite a few of them. You have to get them into a hand lens, have a quick look at them to be able to determine which species. This is a common one though. It tends to like the finer grassland species like the fescues. It's laying its eggs. Yellow conch, again, if you've ever done moth trapping, you don't tell. Well, it's a daytime flying species really, so you will get to light. My fact I like to say to people is that you've got more daytime flying moths than you have breeding butterfly species in the UK. We think of moths as being nocturnal things, but actually, you get loads of ones that are just flying around in the day. And this one is, I think it's a thistle feeder. So if you've got thistles, you're gonna get yellow conch. It's a common moth. It's a common plant. And lastly, of our moth species here, six-spot burnet, and that's just always that's a stunning picture in it. Really, sort of got clubbed antennae like butterflies. But hang on, I don't have butterflies. It's confusing, isn't it? Of course. It's hard. They're all scale wings, really. The Leptoptera are all wings made of tiny little scales, and that's what you call them, really. But micro moth conservation doesn't have quite the same ring. It's a lovely moth, nevertheless. Now, obviously, Hemiptera are again warmth-loving insects. A lot of them. Let's start off with a fairly easy group, the bumblebees. There's only a few species of them. This is why they're good as a monitoring technique, because people with just getting into entomology can sort of pick up the sort of main ones and go around. And this is one that's incredibly common, the red-tailed bumblebee. They're quite incredible insects, really, because they're originally from the Himalayas, so they've got these hairs on them to withstand the cold. Although this one, I've seen gone out in the garden when it's been 35 degrees, we've had a heat wave, it's still out there foraging, when some insects have stopped. Hoverflies for instance, don't tend to go out when it's too hot. And this thing obviously, goes out there and forages for nectar. And of course, the queens will overwinter in a burrow in the ground. So, if you've got ant hills, which we'll come to in a bit, that's a good place to make a nest. IVB, just select a few things random here, really, because bees are a massive subject in itself. This wasn't seen in the country until 1993. Then it's just expanded northwards. They're ground nesters. You I've seen them in, at Rotherwas in Hereford. A nice little thing to see, burrowing out of the ground. And as the name suggests, they do feed on ivy, but they feed on other things as well, but not just ivy. Now, not all bees, of course, are I'll just go around and doing their own thing. Some are parasites. This is the mining bee. It's a parasite. You can see it's heavily armoured. Looks like a wasp as well. I often actually do think, oh, it's a wasp, and then I realise I'm wrong. But this is quite a few, like bees, and the life cycles of which, they're quite fascinating once you get into them. Now, I should mention part of the Hemiptera are the ants. One of the biggest ecological engineers are our yellow meadow ant, which is Lasius flavus. Although, got to be careful with ants. I say to a few people, you can't just put it down as your yellow meadow ant or your black pavement ant. You've got to look under a microscope, really, because there are a few looky-likeys, and they're really, really tricky. But just as an important point here, with the yellow meadow ant, say they are incredibly important in terms of their ant hills and the way they actually create ecosystems within a habitat. So there's some recent research done by Tim Kaye, I think his name was, and he looked at taking cores from ant hills and the surrounding vegetation. This is from the recent article in British Wildlife. And he found that, per metre squared in the surrounding vegetations outside an ant hill, there was 5,500 worker ants, over 2,000 aphids, 7,390 springtails, and 21,000 mites. That's a lot of looking under a microscope. That, if you like doing that sort of thing, he obviously did. There's a lot out there. But what ants will do is they will farm aphids. Aphids feed on the roots of grasses and other plants, and they'll farm them for their honeydew, and they'll actually select different types, the types that they like. They actually really are farming selective breeding, if you like, and nurture them, and then obviously feed that honeydew, obviously feed their grubs when they get back to the ant hills. Now, of course, within the ant hills, not only these vast numbers of biomass of insects, there's all, not just insects, of course, mites as well, but within an ant hill has different topography. So you'll get different plants will thrive on very hot, dry soils, like, say, fairy flax, for instance, that's on calcareous ground. And with all these ants, of course, you'll get things burrowing into it, like badgers and rabbits and everything else, but also green woodpeckers. So wherever you've got a number of ant hills, they really do support a lot of invertebrate life. I mean, if you're looking at producing pasture for animals, perhaps they're not that good, because, of course, all that biomass, all the plant goodness is being sucked up by the aphids. But those are, it's a balancing act, isn't it? I just thought, again, you will find the black pavement ant in meadows. I just thought I'd put a little picture of there, one in there. I say, look at it very carefully. There's another one, Lasius platythorax, I think it is. That's very, very similar. Hardly any records of ants for this very reason. Now, I should mention we're getting into the wasp area. This is just one example of a wasp. These are things that will take bees. Well, are predated on bees. They nest on the ground quite often, and they poke their little heads up. It's quite endearing. And they go off and find another bee. Voracious predators. And just thought I'd put in this one. Well, I think it's this species anyway. They are really, really hard to do. So, in terms of parasitic wasp, and this is a parasitic wasp, the ichneumon wasps, that it will inject its eggs inside a living caterpillar. The eggs will hatch out, eat the thing from the inside out, alien style. Some of those called Darwin wasps. There are about 2,500 at least ichneumon wasps, and there are 6,600 parasitic wasps in the UK. It just gives you a bit of an insight into, how many species are out there of these things. It's quite incredible. Now, I will I'm getting to the end, don't worry, folks. Just a few little things, tips, and I'm sure if anyone's managing this stuff, they'll probably do half of these things already. Few tips. So we've got to retain those scattered trees and shrubs. Oh, that's shrubs. I was missing an H there. That's terrible. Within and around grasslands. So you might have trees, major trees in the middle of a field as well, of course. But managing hedgerows around and having a good mix of species, you can see there, just an example there. You've got all that, fruit life, and that obviously the birds, but there'll be so many things, invertebrates that feed on this stuff as well. Varied topography is good. So having different slopes and that sort of thing is very important, and having bare ground. For invertebrates, they need it warm and they need it hot for the young to thrive in. So have a few bare patches. If you've driven a vehicle over it, I think great, brilliant. There's been often cases where kids have come on with bikes or people come on with 4x4s and you think, oh, they've wrecked it, but actually think, oh, great, no, they've created some bare ground. Is actually really beneficial for invertebrates. I was at the Shropshire Entomological Day recently, and a guy there said, yeah, blow it up, wreck it. He was really adamant about the fact that, for invertebrates, this is what you kind of need. You need to get that ruderal early successional stage of botany to be good for plants. Obviously not all over the place, it'll just be a muddy field, but having those bare patches is essential. Retain wet areas. This is from the New Forest, so it's obviously quite a special place anyway, but if you've got that ditch in it, if you've got that drainage ditch or pond or anything, retain it, because there'll be so much there. Even in ponds that draw down in winter, the lava in the soil there will be pupating and everything, and there'll be so many species that are associated with wetter areas. Certainly a hoverfly species that their larvae are in rot holes and wet little ponds. In recent years, it's probably why they're not doing so well, because it's just too dry in the summer. So if you can retain those wet areas, it's all to the benefit of invertebrates. As well as having tusky grasses, obviously we're asking a lot for managing your grasses, having all these things, and obviously no one's going to have all these things I'm mentioning, but having tusky grass is essential, really, especially for the Orthoptera and the spiders and all the rest of it. I'm actually looking for harvest mice nests, because they like to make the nest within the bramble stems and the grasses. Anthills, as I've already mentioned, they're really good. Obviously, graze it, sort of cutting. If you're cutting a hay crop, it's pretty difficult without anthills on it, but certainly if you've got the right grazing regime in there, it's really good to retain them. As I've already mentioned, but they are real ecosystem engineers. You can see how many of them are there. If you work out the maths, we've already told you, it'd be an awful lot in that picture. We won't go into too much about grazing and the right amount here, because that's a subject that could take up a whole different presentation, really. But having the right number of stock and having the right type of stock, of course, as well, is really important. You've got to keep on, unless all that grass will revert to scrub, and then it will go to trees, and then we'd be a woodland. So, very important to have that in there, as well as retaining the dung that the animals produce. I struggled to find a picture of dung. I may have thought, I know, mushrooms. My mushroom picture is growing on dung. That'll do. And certainly, if you've got using worming treatments on stock, is really beneficial, because of course then we'll have all the dung-feeding species, of which there are numerous species out there. I did some work for the Nature Recovery Strategy, looking at some of the rarest species, and a third of them, the rarest sorts of species that are declining, they're dung feeders. So I'm constantly having a look at dung, and not just cow dung, but also rabbit and other dung as well. It's all there out to be found. Now, I just mentioned this, having a diverse water structure is very important, of which this is not a diverse water structure. It's just a bit of sheep-wrecked upland, of course, so you might be familiar with it. But yeah, with every sort of habitat you're looking at in terms of wildlife conservation, I suppose, is diversity and having a fractal myriad of habitats, not just all long or all short, having it very diverse and not like this. Taller flowering plants, of course, you've got to have them for nectaring invertebrates. And when you think about taking a hay cut, obviously you're going to leave stuff around the sides for these things to thrive, or perhaps leaving a strip down the middle, perhaps if you're taking a hay cut, so some things will, not just the flowers will continue to flower, but also the larval pupal stages, and some of the overwintering adults as well will be happy in there rather than cut it off. Now, weed control, this is something I've been doing on my own. It's not my own field, tree as it is, but friends of mine own it. I sort of do the management for them on it, and they don't believe in any pests, herbicides or pesticides, whatever. And first I was thinking, I'm bound quite fairly anti-pesticide myself, but in this case I'm thinking, yeah, maybe a couple of spots will do, because I had the big dock problem, so resorted to digging them up by hand. I recognise, though, of course, if you've got loads of massive fields, this is not going to be an option. It's only because it's fairly small. I can just about do it. Not that I haven't broken my back doing it, but has made a difference, though. Monitoring these fields, Horspool Meadow in Peachchurch, has actually shown a decline in weed species. This weedier species I don't want. Not that I want to ever get rid of docks or thistles, because generally when I'm doing monitoring for invertebrates or bees, particularly, it's the only place you see them on top of thistles. But yeah, digging out docks by hand, it's great fun. Keeps you fit as well. Lastly, I would say, retain deadwood. This is something I'd say for any habitat management. Retain deadwood wherever you can. A lot of the species that are rare in this country, some sort of figure I can't remember. It's like 40% of them are ones that thrive in some part of their life cycle on deadwood. Not that I retained any of this here in my picture, because that's all firewood, but it's the only picture I had. So where you can, keep that dead wood. Don't carve, don't tidy it up, whatnot. Unless, of course, like me, you need a little bit for the fire. That's okay. Now, a couple of just brief case studies before we finish. I don't want to go on too long and bore people. I just want this a sort of personal connection to me, really. This one. So when I used to live in Wiltshire, I was a countryside ranger, and then I worked for the Wildlife Trust. And part of that, I used to go up to a place called Morgan's Hill and look for this thing called the Duke of Burgundy butterfly. At one point, it was called the Duke of Burgundy fritillary because it looked it's close. It looks sort of similar to our fritillaries, but this thing is actually in a family all of its own. The metal marks, which most of them are like from Central America. So it's only one representative of it. The males can be quite territorial. They'll come up before the females. They'll mate with them, and they like to lay their eggs either on primrose or cowslip. Now, they're seen as a bit of a sort of woodland species in some respects, because they've thought to be declining because of the lack of coppicing. They need obviously open habitat. They need be open enough for cowslips and primroses to flower, and they can lay their eggs on them. But where they are found now is mainly on sort of downland, chalk downland. So this is a picture of Morgan's Hill in Wiltshire. A shortly grazed there, the terracets on there. And went up looking for this thing. Did I find it on Morgan's Hill, this lovely nature reserve owned by Wiltshire Wildlife Trust? No, I actually found it on the golf course right next to it, with a taller, sort of more scrubbier, taller grasses. That's where it seemed to. That's where it likes it the best. It's just most nature reserves are kind of managed to keep it quite short, so this thing can happen. And what the actual Duke of Burgundy likes is a bit more taller sward, so it's very hard to manage for it. I mean, fortunately, there you've got the golf course, which has sort of variety of different habitats, so taller grasses, hedgerow trees, scattered vegetation, and short turf, which managing this chalk grass and didn't have, so it is quite tricky. But then its population is still okay, I think, up there, as far as I know. But anyway, I was quite happy to see it. I don't know if any other people listening have seen them. They're quite lovely things. Now, the other thing, I thought I'd just briefly mention is the red-girdled mining bee. So a couple of people might be familiar with some of these bees. The solitary bees is quite a large group. They have sort of this fovea, this hairy fovea, on the inside of the eye, and this species is mainly a southern species. I think it was listed as nationally notable bee. I think I can't remember now, but it's rarish, shall we say. And I looked up some of this sort of data on it. Now in Herefordshire, it's found in Lupton, sort of more in the north of the county, by quite a good ecologist. And then a bit later on, another one was found in the Doward. Surprise, all the best things are found in the Doward. Now, what's interesting about this bee is that, it's been shown to feed on all these different types of plant. It kind of begs the question of, what does it need? It just needs a wide variety. Some of these things, they just probably need that sort of range of plants in which to thrive. So if you haven't got that diversity, they're not going to do that well. I think they probably are more common, but not many people are looking for these solitary bee species, because they are fairly tricky things. I'm sure more of them are out there. So just two little examples really about sort of the difficulty of managing grasslands for a particular thing, and also just stressing the fact that you should have a wider diversity as possible of flowering plants. So lastly, before I wrap up, I mentioned it at the start, we are a social enterprise. We've been going for 10 years now. You might be familiar with some of our work. So we work at festivals doing traditional craft projects, but also run horticultural gardening projects. And also I do a lot of ecological engagement work, especially with young people. So I've been doing like this project called Future Naturalists recently, where I give kids nets or white trays to dip in a pond or whatever, and they go around and record it and actually learn the names of common plants and animals. Hopefully, as mentioned, I see some of you on the 6th of June, where we'll have it actually in the field looking at some of the things, because I can talk about this sort of thing, for ages on here, but it becomes much more relevant when you've got it in the hand and you're actually looking at this stuff and seeing it in the flesh. So if there's any questions from anybody, I suppose, is that possible to have questions now? I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. That was really fascinating. I really enjoyed that. Really useful management techniques, and really interesting to see so many different invertebrates. So common that, you know, if we get out there and we're looking for them, we'll start to see them. So yeah, everybody is muted, but if anyone wants to unmute and ask Tim a question.
Tim, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Do you see a variation of insects on different grass types? I'm talking about native grasses versus non-native, like ryegrass. Do you see a variation?
Yeah, I probably, I do. I mean, I work in I work a lot in schools, and the sort of more, some of the school grasslands differ because they're composed a lot more of ryegrasses and sort of commercial varieties. And I think it's probably less than if I go to a sort of nicer hay meadow, which are, you know, or something like that. I mean, I obviously need to do some actual qualitative work on that, you know. But I think, from my view, you do get a wide variation. You know, if you go up elevation or west to east in the country, you're going to you get a wide variety of different things being found. But you know, some things are very common. Like, I mean, you know, the candy striped spider. You can guarantee if you get a grassland, you get a net out, you're going to find, you know, the 5-10. You can almost, you know, reel them off before you've even started. Sometimes, you know, you think, oh, I know what I'm going to get. Are you going to get it? I might as well write it down now. Save time. So yeah, there is, and you've obviously acid grassland is going to differ from the chalk grassland as well. You're just going to get different plants, and often you get different plants. You're going to get different invertebrates.
Thank you.
I've got a question.
Yep. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, I'm in London. My dad's got a farm in the Wye Valley in mid Wales near Bilthwells. I'm going there next week, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Any thoughts on sort of monitoring? You know, is it the only option to get an ecologist in and do transects, as you were saying, or are there sort of emerging technologies with AI? I know there's digital imagery analysis looking at various things that, you know, that can be used in certain circumstances, but I just wondered, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's much easier for plants, admittedly, and that's just why it's become the norm to, you know, go out there and you do your UK habitat survey and you can say, oh, that's a certain habitat type. But invertebrates are incredibly, you know, hard, and you could spend a fortune on it. You know, if you wanted to know every single thrips and every single springtail species, you'd be paying the experts around the country. You'd be paying thousands of pounds, and that is just not tenable, is it, for anybody? But I think where I've done it before, you know, where you've done a bumblebee transect walk, this is possible to do. It's not the best, but you know, it looks at one. It gives you an indication, and that's what you want, isn't it? You want to be able to have a set parameter that you can do and that you can do cheaply. You don't want to be spending money like, learn a few species, and then you can just repeat that, and then you can sort of compare and contrast. I've been doing some monitoring work at Berkshire Meadow, and I basically just set out my own strategy for their money they've given me. I said, well, how much money have you got? I'll do as much as you can for that, and then we can try and compare it. There's some guidance out there, actually. Natural England have produced some guidance on monitoring invertebrate populations, and it's just like you read it and go, wow, yeah, you know, you really could spend a fortune on it, because you can't use AI, you know, unless you've got, it's just be impossible. Some of the things are so small, it just doesn't pick it up. If you take a picture of some things, well, it's a weevil, you know, it's a grain of rice. You can't distinguish it. You know, AI has some functionality in terms of, you know, bigger stuff, but you know, smaller things that we're looking at, you know, are the preserve of the you know, people like me, you know, who are looking at smaller and smaller things as our eyesight gets worse.
I was at the UK Rewilding Network, I forgot what it's called, talk last week actually about acoustic survey techniques where you stick a probe into the soil. That's quite interesting. And there's a couple of, it's only been around a couple of years, but it's an emerging technology and it can pick up some species and it can give you an index of species richness. So even if it's not telling you the individual species, it tells you the diversity of frequency of sounds.
Yeah.
And then you can compare and contrast that over time. So that it is a sort of evolving area, I would say.
Yeah, I'd heard of it for rodent acoustic surveys for rodents, but not heard of it for insects. So that's interesting.
Stridulating, is that a word?
Stridulation, yeah.
Stridulation,
yeah, stridulation. I guess it just, yeah.
You can pick that up, yeah.
Everything stridulates, but again, it's.
Just to add to that, Charles, as well, it's something that we're looking at the moment is for Wye Valley Wilding to buy some of this type of monitoring equipment and then loan it out to members so that we can start to get a better understanding of the impact of kind of wilding and rewilding and, you know, the management that we do on increasing biodiversity. And we're also going to try and run over the summer just training workshops using Tim and just teach people basics of survey methodology so that you can do it yourself on your land, because across a range of species, really, not just inverts, but amphibians, reptiles. There's lots of technology out there for bats and bird surveys. So we're thinking about teaching people the methods and getting what equipment might be possible. Obviously, our budget is very, very small, but this is something that Tim and I are looking into at the moment. So I'll get in touch with you about the acoustic stuff there. So something we've talked about. Okay.
Final point on that, Louise. I know Powys County Council. There's an organisation within Powys that have got moth traps that they lend, I think.
Okay.
So I can give you the name of the person that I've heard that from, if that's useful.
I can lend somebody one as well. So, you know,
okay.
I think Joe is about to say.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to add that there is this emerging environmental DNA profiling, which at the moment is limited by what has been sequenced. And I don't know how much it costs to get a sample analysed, but the principle is that you take a bit of soil and it will then sequence the DNA in that soil and tell you all the species that were there. I don't want to encourage that too much, though, at risk of putting myself out of a job. But but it's one of these things that at the moment it's very rough and ready, and there's an awful lot of mistakes in the database. But it's something that will develop and get better with time, as well as there's more and more reliable data going into it.
Yeah, I know they did do it, you know, eDNA with great crested newts, and that became the sort of norm, really, didn't it? You know, because people don't ask me to look at great crested newts much anymore, because they're it's there, so it's fine. But yeah, I mean, I imagine it will just get cheaper and cheaper, I guess. But I mean, I imagine it'd be fairly expensive now. I don't know, but
I think it probably is at the moment still, yeah. But it's something to keep an eye on future. If it actually starts to work well, then it's not bad at all. But can I ask another question, though? I'm really glad to see that you were mentioning the importance of the overwintering, the tussocks, all the life stages that we don't see in the summer. Because this is something, well, I've been banging on about for years, as you probably remember. But it's just so much is based around our land management, things like cutting in the autumn. After all the flowers are set seed, just cut the grass, take it away, and of course you're taking away a high percentage of next year's generation of insects. But for a lot of people who have this sort of land that has to be farmed in some way, or they're reliant on the hay, have you got any sort of recommendations for how to sort of do that in a sensible way? What sort of, can you leave areas and let them spread out the rest of it afterwards? Or just any thoughts on that generally, because it's quite difficult.
Yeah, well, I mean, what we've done in the field I managed was just he leaves quite a big swathe around the edge, and really, you know, we hope lots of things will be in there. And other people have, like, I know, people have just left strips down the middle, and then just, you know, and then take a different strip in another year. but I mean, it depends, doesn't it, on what your pressures are and what the season's been. I mean, last year, actually what you got off the fields is so low anyway, because it's so dry, nothing had grown very much. So it's like, well, and then I think a couple of years before, it was just like, just full of rubbish. It's good for cows, the silage, whatever. But yeah, it is really tricky because you've got to make money at the end of the day. You've got to make it so that people, make a living. But yeah, I mean, what I do is just, leave a big margin. Or cut slightly differently and different parameters. Hi.
Tim. So, sorry, I'm not quite sure whether you can hear me.
Go ahead, Tom. We can hear you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Just to add to that very important point about the bits of grassland which are not cut and carried. I've been experimenting with this and have been amazed at how much more productive it is if you leave strips in the middle of the meadows. And it's funny because you would think that the tenant would say, "Oh, come on, you're not letting me take all this lovely hay." But actually, if you take a strip that's maybe 6 or 7 feet wide, maybe a couple of 100 yards long, but you take a strip which is nice and sunny and which tends to have a more diverse sward than the edge, you get an amazing reward in terms of the numbers of things that will stay much longer in the year. Yeah. And obviously that's partly good as a food source for other things that eat them, but it's also extraordinary. And the time when this really mattered recently was in that terrible spring, was it 23, when we had sort of completely saturated grassland. The one place where things survived was in these strips which were uncut all through the winter. And as you say, we moved the strips around, but the thing that was really different was having them in the middle of the sunniest bits of the fields. And I calculated, I mean, the loss of hay was tiny in terms of volume, but it made a huge difference in terms of the performance and habitat terms of the meadows.
Thanks, Tom. I would have put your picture of your strip if I could have found it on my phone.
I'll send you another one.
yeah. Thanks for that.
No, I mean, it was the famous thing was having hundreds and hundreds of common blue butterflies per 100 meters. I mean, it was very odd, and it's never quite been as good as that again. But I think the thing that I was really struck by was how moving the strip into the sunniest places made a huge difference.
That is a really helpful tip there, to keep strips in the sunniest places. That's something easy to remember and something that probably everyone could replicate. That's so useful to have that experience of what a difference that's made. Thank you.
That's very kind. I'd hasten to add that I'm not saying don't have strips in shady places, of course. And there are all sorts of other reasons for having strips that are not to do with huge numbers of insects, because there are clearly very good reasons for not cutting bits on the edges of fields. And just the thing that goes with this, which is really palpable, is that if you've got enough hedges which don't get cut, or get cut every 5 years or something like that, the extraordinary thing that happens is the butterflies in particular, when you cut the hay, they're all kind of unceremoniously ejected from where they've been all the last 6 weeks, all go to the bramble flowers like a sort of commute. And it is really extraordinary how you get this sort of single movement of the ones that don't get mown down by the cutter. Or, some of them are killed, but most of them get put up. And because the hedges have, by luck really, the bramble flowers are out at the same time as you're cutting the hay, there's this extraordinary commute from the grass to the bramble nectar.
Wonderful. It's lovely to see when you've got good biodiversity, these beautiful things, everyday species, but beautiful to see in big numbers. And just it's why we do this, isn't it? It's seeing these things and seeing the movements. It's really, thank you. Helen, I think you've got a question.
Yes, it's just a sort of quick general follow-up question. But firstly, thank you so much for an amazing talk, and all the specifics and then all the advice. Absolutely fantastic. I just had a quick follow-up question really about the hay cutting. I mean, is there a general principle about the timing of it? I mean, obviously the strips are important. Is it for the invertebrates? Any sort of general recommendation there?
I mean, it's generally recommended July. I kind of leave it till as late as possible. Until everything's set seed. That's the thing, isn't it? Just as long as it's set seed, and then having.
But it doesn't make any difference from the point. It's not a sort of general better or worse from the point of view of the invertebrates and the larvae feeding on various bits.
Well, I mean, it's no good for grasshoppers, is it? If you cut it at July and the grasshoppers are still in there or anything else. I mean, no, but then
maybe a bit later, really. I just wonder if you were going to.
Yeah, it's a conundrum because as we mentioned, we've got to think about these things at different stages of growth.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's fair to say that having a variety is good. Variety of cutting dates. I mean, that's all very easy to say, and I'm in terms of significant cutting completely in the hands of my tenant. So I don't have much control over it beyond the rules that we follow being in mid-tier, because there are strict rules about when you can first cut.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a good idea if you can leave stuff for longer, as Tim says, but not all of it. I mean, it's always. I suppose the thing is we're all struggling, aren't we, with kind of small bits of habitat, relatively speaking, and the more variety within those bits, the more sort of stepping stones there are for the next year.
Thank you.
Diana?
Yes, I wanted to ask Joe to explain some of the work he did on Coedmauer, my farm, which I'm managing for diversity of all species like this and others in a special way. And Joe came here this year. Maybe he could just mention what he found and what he did.
I can do, yes. It was basically all I've done so far is pretty preliminary sort of surveys, basically effectively 3 field days, and then looking at things under the microscope afterwards. But what Diana has been doing is managing effectively by cattle. So a small herd of cattle moving around a small farm, different fields. There's no mechanical influence. So it's not being cut for hay. There's no heavy machinery running over the fields at all. And I think this is one thing that is really important to emphasize, in that as soon as you compact the soil, all those mites and springtails are starting to really struggle. The mycelial networks are breaking down. So anything that can be done without any mechanical influence seems to make a big difference. But what I was finding with a lot of Diana's sites is that it's quite wide-ranging. It goes from quite dry hilltops to very wet sort of valley areas. And because it's not being cut, you get a build-up of horizontal layers of vegetation, particularly grasses being flattened on top of each other, decaying in situ, and then more falling down on top of it. The cattle are trampling a bit, but a lot of it is being retained. And as a result, you get enormous numbers of things which might otherwise be there in quite low populations. But also I was finding quite scarce things all over the place. Some of these tiny ladybirds that Tim mentioned, and one that is, I can't remember the name of it now. It was one of the scarce ones. It was new to Radnorshire, or new to Powys, I think it was. And I've never seen it before. That was turning up in a few places. There were a lot of new county records in this area just because there was so much biodiversity being able to thrive in these sheltered places underneath the matted vegetation. So it really doesn't look tidy, and it's not meant to be, because that's what nature likes after all. So you have this all this mosaic that Tim was talking about the wet areas, the drier areas, the anthills, and it all combines into a much more diverse habitat than I've seen around here in many a year, to be honest. And even the dry upland areas, which are quite short cropped by cattle, there's a large diversity of things like leafhoppers, which again tend to be thriving more in southern England, and we just don't normally get them in Radnorshire. So it's that sort of approach, from what I've seen so far, is doing wonders. And the next job is to look at the mites of springtails, see how much difference it's making to the actual soil structure.
And Diana has actually invited Wye Valley Wilding to go on a visit to her farm at Conway. So we are very much looking forward to that. And Diana and I will set a date for that. And so people will be able to see that firsthand. So
yes, you're most welcome. I also wanted, as just a point, to ask or to mention that I've noticed how some of my cattle will go for an anthill and knock it with their head, really quite dramatically. They get some sort of camouflage, mud or whatever it is on their heads. It's a very interesting interaction. I was wondering whether anybody there could shed some light on this action, if there's time.
Tim, have you come across that before?
I'm not an expert on cattle, I've got to admit. No, I don't. Yeah, I must admit, I've seen them do that before, but I wouldn't know what they were trying to do.
There's some sort of, I think there's some sort of important connection between the cattle and this kind of anthill. I don't know whether it somehow does something good for the anthill, or because you would otherwise have many anthills that grow and grow and grow like you see in Africa. But it's not that the cattle knock every anthill, but there is a tendency to go for the anthills and knock them with their heads. Something maybe we should look into, but I don't know the answer to it. I think there is some kind of reason I certainly don't understand it, but there is definitely a camouflage action with regard to the cattle, because they, it's like putting mud on your face.
No, sounds like a PhD project.
Well, it would be very interesting to know. Obviously, not all of the cattle do it, but I have a very small herd. I've the herd which is tailored to my curtilage here. I had to work it out, from trying out 29 cattle at one time down to now I've got 6. And certain times, certain cattle, not all of them do it. So many of the anthills survive. But you were mentioning how full of many different species these anthills are. So they're quite important, but there must be some other ecological reason for this this kind of action. And it's a very excited animal action. I've taken a video of it, as an example, which is nice for people to see and learn about. But I don't myself have the knowledge.
Interesting. No, I don't know. I've heard of cattle, younger cattle or cattle when the horns are coming through, whether it's a form of scratching post almost, whether the formic acid from the ants is kind of feels good to them, is getting in, getting itchy. I don't know. But that's something we can perhaps reach out to anyone else that's got cattle and see how common this is and whether anyone can shed some light on it. So, okay.
Yes, I think there are not many anthills around. Most farmers I fear them and want to get rid of them. But I've never been afraid of an anthill, mainly because, you know, I came from South Africa where there are many, and that's the origin of some very important historical research into the anthill itself and the ants. But I was interested to hear this evening from Tim that an anthill has many different species in it. It's not just ants. So I think there is much more to it. It's not every cow and not every anthill gets hit like this. But if there is a very big anthill, the cows go for it, and you know, several times in a field, and they may only be in a field for maximum 4 days. Sometimes it's less. Depends upon how much grass there is there, and because I manage it very carefully that way. But it is interesting how an anthill will build up because the rest of the farm is empty for all the rotations going on somewhere else, and an anthill will build up, and it then becomes targeted. But yes, clearly there's, well, I thought Joe might know, but something we can research.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Diana. Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions before we should let Tim go? But thank you. I'm thanking him for a very good talk. But does anyone else before we say goodbye and thank you to Tim? Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I really enjoyed that, Tim, and I certainly learned a lot. I thought it's really useful, all the meadow management and seeing the species. So I'm looking forward to the event you're doing for us on the 6th of June. We'll send more information out on that. And thank you, Butch, everybody, for joining us tonight. And we look forward to seeing you at our next online talk in March, also on managing grasslands.
Thanks
Thank
very
you very
much.
much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.